Today we're going to talk about record keeping in the homeschool. Hi, I'm Amanda Beal, and I am a homeschool mom, or at least I used to be. My children have all graduated, gone to college, and gotten jobs, and are functioning adults. So I get lots of questions about homeschool, things that I did, things that worked for me, and so I'm trying to share them with you on Tuesdays. So if you are interested in that, go ahead and subscribe down below. Make sure you click the bell so you get notified, and I will be here to share with you videos to help you as you go through this journey. So I've been asked recently questions about grading and record keeping. And so last week I did a video on grading, and I'll link that at the top. And hopefully that'll help you keep record of grades for your children. But today we're going to talk about record keeping in general, in the grand scheme of things. What kind of records you need to keep, where you need to keep them, how long you need to keep them, and hopefully this will help you with all of the paperwork that you have with homeschooling. I'm first going to tell you to make sure you know and understand your state laws. It is your responsibility to know and understand them. Every state has different laws, and you have to know yours. Different states require different things to be held in records, and it is critical that you have everything that's required for your state. I cannot tell you specifics about your state. I recommend that you check with your local homeschool organization. Another great place to check is the Homeschool Legal Defense Association. I'll have a link for them down in the description box. When it comes to record keeping though, it's also important that you check with any college that your students plan to attend, because they might require certain records. So just be sure that you check with them as well. So on that note, let me tell you that here in my house, we actually keep homeschool files a certain way. I have one big file that's like a general homeschool file. Then I have one file for each of my children, and I have a big giant bucket of work. That's right, I still have the big giant bucket of work. In fact, I think I have a video on it. I'll link it up here if you want to see it. But anyway, so in my big homeschool file, the very first thing that I'm going to tell you you need to have is this. I actually printed my state requirements, and I wrote at the top, you know, high school coursework, and I highlighted it, and then I printed college athletics eligibility, and I printed, this is for my state now, high school attendance, college dual enrollment requirements. I mean, I printed all of the requirements, put notes on them, highlighted, this is driver's ed, this is transcripts. I put all of that in one file, so in case something happens and I need to know, I can simply go to the file, and this is graduation and diplomas, and I can look at all of the requirements and have them on hand. Now, it's important that you check them annually and reprint and re-highlight as necessary. I even have one on returning back to the public school system in case that ever needed to happen. So, mental note, that might be something helpful for you to have in your general homeschool file. In your general homeschool file too, you want to have any kind of official documentation for your homeschool, and any paperwork, whatever you needed to do to get signed up for homeschooling in your state. Keep track of all of those records so you have a paper trail to show that you are in fact homeschooling legally in your state. You want to make sure that you have that. Some other things that you might have in that general homeschool file: immunization records. In our state, we are required to keep immunization records. So you might have them in your main homeschool file, you might have them in your student's individual file, but you definitely want to keep them on hand if your state requires it, or any waivers if you are waiving that. Also, any previous school records, if you can get them from your school, depending on your state, if you're allowed to or not, you should be, but I'm not sure about every state. We did pull our previous school records and have them on file in our homeschool file as well. Another thing you might keep in your general homeschool file is any photos of homeschooling. We did keep that, especially when our children did their biology labs and they actually did dissect and do things like that. We took pictures of that just to document that to go with their lab work. So photos, another thing you can keep in your main file. For your individual student, there are some specific things that you need, and I'm going to show you those. The first thing that I recommend that you keep is an attendance record. Now, this is a blank one that you can get printed off on any, you know, homeschool website. There's a million of these. You don't have to keep this one, but you do need to keep something. And essentially this says your school name, the address, your student's name, their grade level, the school year, the date the school year began, the date the school year ended, and then you also want to keep track of total attendance days and total days absent. Now, obviously if you're homeschooling, you're probably not going to have any absent days. And then down here, comments. that's relevant, believe it or not, for attendance. I'm going to show you an example one that I did for one of my children, and this is how it works. So we checked the days that we actually did, and at the end of every month, I actually wrote down the number of days we completed in that month, because in our state, we're required to do a minimum of 180 days, and so I was basically keeping track, so every month I knew as we were getting closer to the end, you know, when we should stop counting the days. So that's how I personally did it. But there's a lot of different ways that you could do it. Now, this particular one doesn't have a comment section on the end, but there was a year that I actually used the comment section, and there was a year that all three of my children got the flu, and they were off school. We just did not do school for about 6 weeks in the middle of the school year. And I documented that, and I had records as well, just to show that they actually did in fact have the flu. Now, there could be a number of reasons why you would take a large period of time off in the middle of the school year, but you may need to document that. So just a side note, if you have any big gaps, that's something you might want to put in the comments section. But school attendance is something that you want to keep track of. On that note too, you might want to keep a portfolio. Now, my state that I live in now does not require a portfolio, but when we lived in Maryland, Maryland did require a portfolio of sorts. So this is an example of one that I did for Brian when he was in 5th grade. And I actually say Brian grade 5 and the year that he was in grade 5. And so the way that Maryland required it at the time, could be totally different now, because this was many years ago, they required a particular kind of instruction for elementary school. So they required English, and they actually broke it down into reading, literature, composition, and writing. And then they also included grammar, vocabulary, and writing, and then spelling, and then handwriting. And all of that was under the English heading. So in your portfolio, what I recommend that you include is for each, I would divide it up exactly by the sections that your state has laid everything out, which is what I did. And then I listed all of the books that we used. And then I listed the schedule for the day. I don't know if you can see that on there. But I put how many minutes we spent in individualized instruction. And then also any supplementary materials we might have used. In this case, I put the variety of books available at the library and how often we visited. So there's 50 minutes that we spent per day on this particular subject, and that was how, and when you did 180 days in a year, that tells you how much time that you spent on each subject. But I did that for every single one of them. So books, schedule, supplementary materials. Books, schedule, and supplementary materials. All of this for grammar, for spelling, for handwriting, I laid it all out. And so this is what you would put in a portfolio to label each section. But then in addition to the actual section information, for a portfolio, you want to have examples of student work. And what I basically did was, every month I tried to pick at least 2 examples of my students' work. And so by the end of the year, a school year is usually about 9 months, we would have 18 pieces of paper between each section. And that was just to show that the children were consistently improving based on what we were doing in our school. So that's just an idea of what a portfolio looks like. Again, your state may require different things, or your state might not even require it at all. But in this case, I actually kept doing it because I thought, I might need to look back and figure out what materials we were using. So I recommend a portfolio if you have one, just to keep track of what your child is actually doing, what books you use, how much time you spend on each subject, and any supplementary materials you might be using. So a portfolio is a good idea and a help. Grades. Again, I did a video on grades last week, and I told you exactly what you need to do for grades and keep track of it. And I said once you get to the end of the year with your grades, and you do want to keep track of all report cards and interim reports in your file, and once you get those grades, put them on your transcript. So this is a blank transcript. Again, there's a million things you can get online to show you. This is just one example. There's a million blank ones. You can Google blank transcript and probably find 10 of these. But anyway, this one just has the name, address. It says parents, but you would put school administrator, student's birth date. It tells you the grade scale, which is A, B, C, D, E, F, and see if you do 4 points, 3 points, 2 points to get the GPA, because when they graduate, you will need a GPA. And then each of the subjects for each of the grades. Now, this is a high school transcript right here, grades 9, 10, 11, and 12. And this is very, very similar to what we did for our students. But you do also want to keep track for elementary school as well. This is one of my students, elementary school. And he actually went to a public school and a private school. So I just marked and I have those records. And then the grades that we have for homeschool are on the other side, and that's elementary and middle school grades. So, side note, we kept track of all of the grades, elementary all the way through high school, on a transcript. And a lot of times you need those, particularly if you're going to move your student back into the public school system or private school system at any time. So keeping good records is important. You want to make sure you have your transcript. By the way, on your transcript, you're going to have also test scores, which you need to keep track of, and any extracurricular activities, which brings me into my next thing that you need to keep in your students' records, test scores. These are Brian's PSAT scores, and I kept the entire paper that came from them. And I did that every year. In our state, you're required to do annual testing. And actually, in our state, the PSAT does not qualify for your annual test. So make sure you know which ones qualify and which do not. But I kept track of all of their state required annual tests and kept the actual tests in the folder every year, usually next to their attendance record and their transcript. It's a lot. It seems like a lot of pieces of paper, but it's really not once you get the hang of it. You're just constantly keeping things in a file, tossing it in, moving on. The other thing you want to keep track of is any extracurricular activities your students do. Now, I required all of my children to do volunteer work before they graduated high school, and I did keep a record of all of their volunteer work. Brian worked at our local hospital, so I kept track of his attendance at the volunteer position and also his paperwork saying that he was admitted to and completed his volunteer time at the hospital. So, and I did that for my other children with their volunteer work as well. Any other extracurricular activities that they do, Brian was also on a student newspaper in our homeschool group and wrote articles, and I kept copies of the articles. Brian helped with some other volunteer activities. I kept records of those, and if there was no paperwork records, then I took pictures. And again, keeping pictures will also be a helpful part of your records. But you just want to make sure you're keeping track of any extracurricular activities, particularly anything that would go on your high school transcript that might be important for colleges to be aware of. So far we have your attendance record, your portfolio, your grades, your transcripts, all your test scores, and your extracurricular activities. And then you also need your official paperwork, immunization records, previous school records, homeschool photos. It's a lot, but as I said, you're going to keep it in separate files for each student and then one major homeschool file. But what about all of the rest of your students' work? What are you going to do with that? Well, that depends on you. Homeschool Legal Defense Association recommends that you keep all of your students' work, and yes, I said all, indefinitely. That is correct. Now, I can't speak to whether or not you want to do that. I just know this. I have all of my students' work, and I have it in buckets, and I have it in my closet, and I just have it just in case. And like I said, I still have the files all here. Basically, what I do to keep all of my children's work is I take all of the paperwork out of all of the folders, out of all of the workbooks, and I put it in a paper file, not one like a hanging file, but a paper file, and then I will rubber band it, and then I will write the student's name, and what grade they were in, and what year that was. And then that goes into my bucket. And that is how I keep track of it. And I do try within the file folder to keep them divided by subjects. So I'll put all of the English first, and then all of the math, and then all of the social studies, and that way it's all in order and I can find it. That's how I keep the bulk of the paperwork. I also have, once my children graduated, their diplomas and their final official transcripts in here, and I have saved copies online, digital copies, that I have given to both my student to make sure they have their own copy of it, and they also have hard copies as well. And I also sent a spare copy to a friend who is also a homeschooler, just in case anything ever happens. You know, I've had a few friends who've lost their spouses or something happened, and I thought, you know, if something were to happen, I want to make sure they have access to any of their student records, and I want to make sure nothing gets accidentally destroyed. So the most important things that they have are their transcripts and their diplomas. They all have it, and I have someone else who they can go to if they need an emergency copy. So I do recommend that you give a spare copy out, not just to your student, but to someone else as well, to make sure that they will always have access in their lifetime to a copy. And I also, in addition to that, I gave each of their siblings copies as well, just so that they, and I told them, make sure you save it so that they also have copies from their siblings. So that's it. That's the short version of record keeping, what you need to keep and how you need to keep it, how long you need to keep it, and who needs to have copies of it. It's a lot. I know record keeping can be a lot, but it's not too complicated, like I said, once you get in the habit. A lot of the record keeping is on the front end and the back end of each school year. Of course, setting up your portfolio, making sure you have everything labeled, understanding how you're going to keep your grades, and at the end of the year, making sure everything's written down, put in your transcript, and then putting it aside for the next year. But if you're doing it regularly, if you're keeping track of it every year at the beginning and end of the year, then when it comes time for your student to graduate, you have every single thing you need in your files and you're ready to go. And trust me when I say, when it comes time to preparing for college, you will be glad that it is all in order. So that's it. If you guys have any questions about record keeping that I can help you with, something I didn't cover, go ahead and let me know down in the comments and I'll try to answer it. If you have any other suggestions for record keeping, put that in the comments as well, and maybe that could be helpful to someone else. Thank you all for hanging out with me. I hope you have a wonderful day. Come back and see us next time, and we'll see you then. Bye.